In this video, we will talk about writing the introductory chapter in your thesis or dissertation. We are working from this different book in this video. It's written by Evans, Gruber, and Zobel in 2014, and it's called How to Write a Better Thesis, and published by Springer. And this video is based on chapter 5 in this book. So we will talk about 5 main components of an introductory chapter, such as establishing a context, stating the problem, motivating the study, aim and the scope of the study, significance of the study, overview of the study. We will also discuss whether or not to include, and if yes, how to include research questions and hypotheses in your introductory chapter. And we will also talk about how we could revise the aim and align the conclusion with the introductory chapter. So the first thing your introduction should do is to establish a context for your study. Your job as a researcher is to situate your study so that readers could understand what your point of concern is, right? And it is very common in establishing a context in an introduction for authors to respond to a specific issue within an established agenda for research, right? So you, by this time, you understand that your topic is part of a larger, research effort, and there is a specific issue to which you are responding, and you explicitly, highlight that and show that to the reader very clearly as you can. And generally, we use a quite formal style of writing, referring to the literature in the field or referring to some some issues in the field, right? In some cases, a less formal writing style of writing is possible. So in chapter 5 in this book, there's an example of a medical dissertation which was written in response to a personal, to a personal experience, and in that case, it was very appropriate to establish a context for the study uh, by referring to the author's personal experience. But in most cases, really, we tend to use a formal style of writing for establishing a context. The second thing that your introductory chapter should do is to either state the problem if you are choosing like this kind of approach, or if you are not really addressing any problem, a milder approach would be to motivate the study, right? So in any event, you have to choose, you have to do one of those things, stating the problem and motivating the study, or motivating the study. And these two approaches are kind of two facets of you're doing the same thing. You're showing the reader why your problem is, why your research, why your dissertation or thesis is important. Okay, so once you have situated your work, you provided some context for it, right? You have to motivate further interest in the area, showing the readers why they should care about your dissertation or thesis, right? And one approach that might work for you is to state the problem. This is more like, I would say, not harsh, not strong, but more like, kind of an approach that requires you a very bold approach. And if you're just, however, if your dissertation or thesis do address some problem and you offer some solution in it, then go ahead and state your problem, right? And maybe you can present, you are presenting a way of doing things, uh, and you argue that the current way of doing things is inadequate in some way, okay, or in many ways, right? And maybe you, in your dissertation, you are offering a better way of doing things, right? Maybe you could argue that an existing theory doesn't explain what you observe, in actual life. So it doesn't explain it sufficiently well. So be sure to provide some solution, of course, right? In many cases, some dissertations do not solve big problems. In that case, maybe you want to choose a milder approach, right? So you could motivate further interest in your work by motivating your study, right? So you could show that your work is still important, for example, by arguing that it is necessary to offer a new way of seeing things, right? A new way of interpreting things, a new way of understanding things, right? So in either case, you have to, if you are solving some problem in your dissertation, then state the problem in the introduction, right? If you are choosing a milder approach, right, but you still need to show why people should care about your work, then you motivate your study. And really, there is no single correct approach to writing the problem statement or motivation, right? And most of the authors, you will have to keep refining it as you go along, as you progress along writing, as you work on your dissertation or thesis. And one advice, especially for beginner researchers, is to keep refining your problem statement or motivation, right? As you do your literature review, as you do your analysis, as you finalize your conclusion, you have to come back to your introduction and keep asking yourself whether the problem that you stated is still relevant, right? Whether your problem is sufficiently narrow, or how does the problem or motivation foreshadow your approach to the study? Maybe you need to change your approach to in your investigation. So you'll have to be coming back to your problem statement and motivation. Make sure that it is aligned with the rest of your thesis. And there are four things commonly found in problem statements or motivations for the study, right? So consider one of this, maybe, or you could consider more than one of these four things to include in your introductory chapter. So a researcher could offer a brief history of the issue at hand to show that this new study, this new dissertation is necessary to write, right? Or an author could highlight a recent increase in the issue, right? Which makes this present proposed study, relevant and important. An author could formulate dissatisfaction with the current knowledge, right? And show that there is a need to learn more about something, right? Finally, an author could identify a specific set of factors that make the study important and that make it something that people should care about. All right, the next thing that your introductory chapter should have is formulation of your aim and the scope of the study, right? And you should have one aim. So if you are thinking about more than one aim, you have a list of aims, then you should think about how all those aims could be formulated as one, or maybe you just have to choose one, the most important, the most important aim from the list that you have at the moment. And your aim should have three characteristics. One, it should follow as a logical consequence of a problem statement. So it should be singular, and the conclusion in your last chapter must respond to this aim. So again, remember about alignment. You will be going to and fro between between the chapters, and your job is to make sure that your chapters are aligned. Finally, your introduction should explain the significance of your study, right? And you can think about the significance as the potential impact of your study, right? Where do you think your study will make the most difference to current thinking or to current practice? Okay, and for most commonly used lines of argument that to establish significance are as follows. One, your study advances knowledge in the field. Obvious, right? Two, your study contributes to the solution of a practical problem, like a For three, it demonstrates a novel use of a procedure or technique, some sort of a method, right? And finally, your study contributes to a part of is a part of a programmatic research effort, right? So there are theoretical and practical applications that could be implemented in other parts of this big programmatic research effort. That happens usually if you are working off a grant with your advisor on a part of a big uh, large-scale research project. Finally, your introductory chapter should have an overview of the study, right? Uh, this is sort of sometimes it's called like a roadmap, which consists of several paragraphs, each in which you describe what each chapter following the introductory chapter does. Okay, something like in chapter two, I provide a literature review of blah blah blah. In chapter three, I describe the methodology and data I use. In chapter four, I present my results. In chapter five, I provide a discussion of the findings and how they relate to the existing literature, and the final chapter concludes, something like that, right? So think about it as an annotated version of the table of contents, right? But you just write it in interconnected sentences and paragraphs. You kind of introduce, you kind of show the reader what they will be reading after they finish reading the introductory chapter. Okay, and it follows logically from the aim of your study and should be aligned from basically it kind of describes, it kind of unfolds everything that is necessary to respond to the aim of the study. So those were the five main components of an introductory chapter. So um, you know, students often ask whether to include research questions and hypotheses in their introduction, and the answer is not always like very straightforward. Often, whether or not to include research questions and hypotheses into the intro is field and context specific, right? Depends on the specific discipline you're working from, and it also depends on the kind of dissertation, the kind of data you're working from, and maybe sometimes it depends on what your advisor requests, right, or your committee requests. Um, However, the general advice is if your discipline or your advisor or your specific dissertation context does not, welcome including your research questions in the introduction, the general advice is at least to make a general statement of the research questions or your hypothesis in the first chapter, right? You can express them maybe through your aim. Um, Kind of let the reader understand what you are going to do, what you're going to study. Okay, um, so really that helps the reader to understand what the point of your dissertation is, of what the point of your thesis is. Okay, and I think another advice is maybe it is indeed wise to avoid presenting hypothesis, right, in the introductory chapter. Um, Research questions in some form are sufficient for the introductory chapter. And once you're done with your introduction, be sure that you keep revising the aim of your study, and be sure that your conclusion chapter is aligned with your introductory chapter. In fact, the authors of the book, How to Write a Better Thesis, recommend that you write your introduction and conclusion at the same time, even before your study is finished, right? And keep revising them. And when you revise the other, make sure that they are aligned, right? So really the point of your conclusion chapter is to respond to the aim of your study. So if your aims change or scope changes, then your conclusion changes too. Or if your conclusion is like in your conclusion you found something, you conclude something which is like is beyond the aim or the scope of your of your work stated in the introduction, then you should probably edit the aim and scope, right? Often your first draft of the introductory chapter is kind of like your first attempt of understanding your literature, your problem, your research questions, right? What you have to do. So the advice is to really write the introduction early and then revise. And if you can, write the intro and conclusion together and then revise them together, okay? And the standard amount for introductions is 7 to 10 pages. Well, it depends if you have your departmental regulations, which have a different page limit, but they could have a smaller or larger, a greater amount of pages required for the intro. But if you have a 7 to 10 pages draft, you're in good shape.